crime alert. A man accused of killing his ex-girlfriend is on the run. Davion Bentley is accused of shooting Brenda Mullins at her home on Joyce Drive in Baton Rouge around 10:30 last night. After an argument, Mullins was taken to the hospital where she died. Bentley fled. He's wanted for a list of charges, including first-degree murder and home invasion. He's considered armed and dangerous.
The 911 call came in at 11:47 p.m. on September 16, 2020. A child's voice, trembling with terror, whispered into the phone, "Someone just shot my mom through the door." In the background, you could hear the other children crying, their world shattered in an instant by the sound of gunfire that had just echoed through their Baton Rouge home on Joyce Drive. But this wasn't a random act of violence. This wasn't a stranger breaking in during the night. The person who pulled that trigger was someone Brenda Mullins knew intimately, someone she had once trusted, someone she had loved. And in those final moments, as she stood behind her screen door, refusing to let him in, she made a choice that would cost her everything. What drives a person to commit such an unthinkable act? How does someone cross that line from love to lethal violence? And what happens when fame, criminal desperation, and domestic fury collide in the most deadly way possible? Tonight, we're diving into the case of Davion "Juice" Bentley, a 24-year-old rapper whose music career was overshadowed by a criminal record that stretched back years. By September 2020, Bentley wasn't just a struggling artist trying to make it in the music industry. He was a wanted man, running from the law, desperate for a place to hide. And when the mother of 3 children refused to shelter him, he made a decision that would destroy multiple lives forever. If you're new here, subscribe for the most shocking true crime cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And hit that notification bell so you never miss when we upload these incredible stories. This case has everything. A rapper living a double life, a pattern of violence that authorities should have stopped, children who witnessed the unthinkable, and a woman who paid the ultimate price for saying no to a dangerous man. But to understand how a simple refusal to open a door led to murder, we need to go back to where this all began. This story takes us to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a city where Southern charm meets industrial power, but where darkness often lurks beneath the surface. As Louisiana's state capital, Baton Rouge has long been the political heart of the Pelican State, while its massive petrochemical industry has made it an economic powerhouse along the Mississippi River. But Baton Rouge carries a heavy burden that many visitors never see. The city struggles with crime rates that consistently rank higher than the national average, particularly when it comes to violent offenses. Domestic violence incidents plague the community at alarming rates, creating a dangerous environment where personal disputes too often turn deadly. Joyce Drive, where our story unfolds, sits in a residential area that reflects both the promise and the problems of modern Baton Rouge. It's a neighborhood where working families try to build better lives, where children play in front yards, and where mothers like Brenda Mullins believe they could find safety behind their own front doors. On any given night, the streets of Baton Rouge see their share of violence. But what happened on Joyce Drive that September evening would shock even a city accustomed to crime. The combination of domestic fury, criminal desperation, and easy access to firearms created a perfect storm that would leave a family destroyed and a community asking how such a tragedy could have been prevented. What state or country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing from viewers around the world. Meet Davion "Juice" Bentley, a 24-year-old rapper from Baton Rouge who seemed to be living 2 completely different lives. On the surface, Bentley was building a name for himself in the competitive world of hip-hop, cultivating an image that resonated with tens of thousands of followers across social media platforms. His Instagram account painted the picture of a street-smart artist who had made it out of the struggle, showcasing the lifestyle that many aspiring rappers dream of achieving. But behind the carefully crafted posts and aggressive lyrics lay a much darker reality. Bentley's rise in the music world was paralleled by an equally dramatic fall into serious criminal behavior that would ultimately define his legacy in the worst possible way. The warning signs had been there for years. In 2017, Bentley found himself in handcuffs for the first time, marking the beginning of what would become an escalating pattern of violent crime. But this wasn't just a young man making a few bad choices. This was someone whose criminal activities were becoming increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. The charges against Bentley read like a roadmap to disaster: home invasion, illegal weapon use, possession of firearms as a felon, and property damage. Each arrest should have been a wake-up call, each charge a chance to change course. Instead, Bentley seemed to double down on the criminal lifestyle that was slowly consuming his life and threatening everyone around him. What made Bentley's case particularly disturbing was how his public persona completely contradicted his private behavior. While his Instagram followers saw images of success and street credibility, those closest to him experienced something far more terrifying. His social media presence was filled with violent lyrics and imagery that reflected not just artistic expression, but real-life experiences with crime and aggression. The content Bentley shared online wasn't just entertainment. It was a window into a mindset that glorified violence and treated dangerous behavior as something to be celebrated rather than condemned. His posts reflected a lifestyle intertwined with street life and aggression, creating a feedback loop where his criminal activities fueled his artistic persona, and his artistic persona justified his criminal activities. But perhaps most concerning was Bentley's history of domestic abuse and volatile relationships. This wasn't someone who saved his violence for the streets. This was someone who brought that same aggression into his most intimate relationships. The pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. Bentley had a problem with control, with anger, and with using violence to get what he wanted. Those who knew him personally understood that the charming rapper they might see in interviews or social media posts could transform into someone completely different behind closed doors. His relationships were marked by manipulation, intimidation, and abuse, a toxic combination that should have raised red flags for everyone in his orbit. By 2020, Bentley wasn't just a rapper with a criminal record. He was a wanted man whose past was finally catching up with him. The same violent tendencies that he had been able to channel into his music and social media presence were now making him a fugitive from justice. He was facing multiple charges, and law enforcement was actively seeking his arrest. This created a dangerous situation where a man with a documented history of violence and domestic abuse was now desperate, cornered, and running out of options. When someone like Bentley finds himself with nowhere to turn, the people closest to him become the most vulnerable. And tragically, that's exactly what happened to Brenda Mullins. Brenda Mullins was a mother trying to protect her family and build a stable life in Baton Rouge. Like many women who find themselves in dangerous relationships, she likely never imagined that a brief romantic connection would ultimately cost her everything. Brenda had 3 children who depended on her, looked up to her, and trusted her to keep them safe, a responsibility she took seriously until the very end. Her relationship with Davon "Juice" Bentley lasted only 2 to 3 months, but in that short time, the warning signs were already becoming impossible to ignore. What might have started as attraction to a charismatic local rapper quickly revealed itself to be something much more dangerous. Bentley brought his pattern of domestic abuse and controlling behavior directly into Brenda's life and home. The red flags that appeared during their brief relationship painted a disturbing picture of a man who couldn't handle rejection, couldn't respect boundaries, and couldn't control his violent impulses when things didn't go his way. Brenda experienced firsthand the same volatile behavior that had marked Bentley's previous relationships: the manipulation, the intimidation, and the underlying threat of violence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. For Brenda, the decision to end the relationship wasn't just about her own safety. It was about protecting her children from a man whose criminal behavior and violent tendencies made him a danger to everyone around him. She recognized that Bentley's escalating legal troubles and aggressive personality created an environment that no mother would want her children exposed to. But breaking up with someone like Bentley wasn't as simple as just walking away. His history of domestic abuse meant that ending the relationship could actually be the most dangerous time for Brenda and her family. Statistics show that domestic violence often escalates when the victim tries to leave, and Bentley's criminal record suggested he wasn't someone who would accept rejection gracefully. By September 2020, Bentley's desperation was reaching a boiling point. He was a wanted man facing serious charges, running out of places to hide, and running out of people willing to help him. His legal troubles were mounting, law enforcement was closing in, and his options were becoming increasingly limited. In this desperate state, Bentley turned to the people from his past, including his ex-girlfriend Brenda. But Brenda had already made her choice. She had ended their relationship for good reasons, and she wasn't about to compromise her family's safety to help a man who had already shown her his true nature. Her 3 children, innocent witnesses to whatever happened in their home, would become the key to understanding exactly what transpired on that fatal night. They had seen enough of Bentley during his relationship with their mother to recognize him, to fear him, and ultimately to identify him as the person who destroyed their family forever. September 16th, 2020 started like any other evening on Joyce Drive. Families were settling in for the night. Children were finishing homework, and mothers like Brenda Mullins were going through their usual bedtime routines. But as the hours ticked toward midnight, this quiet residential street was about to become the scene of an unthinkable tragedy. Somewhere in Baton Rouge, Davon Juice Bentley was running out of time and running out of options. As a wanted man with active warrants, he couldn't go home, couldn't stay with friends who might be watched by police, and couldn't check into any hotel without risking immediate arrest. The walls were closing in, and desperation was driving every decision he made. That's when Bentley's thoughts turned to his ex-girlfriend, Brenda Mullins. Despite their tumultuous relationship and the reasons she had ended things between them, Bentley saw her as someone who might provide the shelter he desperately needed. In his mind, their past relationship meant she owed him something, a place to hide, protection from the consequences of his own actions. The phone call started that evening. Bentley reached out to Brenda repeatedly, each call more urgent than the last. He needed help. He needed a place to stay. He needed her to open her door and let him in. But Brenda had already made her position clear when she ended their relationship months earlier. She wasn't going to put herself or her children at risk for a man whose violent behavior and criminal activities had already shown her exactly who he really was. But Bentley wasn't taking no for an answer. When the phone calls failed to convince Brenda to help him, he decided to take a more direct approach. Late that night, he made his way to Joyce Drive, to the home where Brenda was trying to keep her family safe from exactly this kind of situation. When Bentley arrived at Brenda's front door, the confrontation that followed would expose the true nature of their relationship and the real reason she had been so determined to keep him out of her life. This wasn't just about refusing to help an ex-boyfriend. This was about a mother protecting her children from a dangerous man who had already proven he couldn't be trusted. Brenda found herself in an impossible situation. Bentley was outside her home, demanding entry, insisting that she help him evade the law enforcement officers who were actively searching for him. The pressure was intense, the threats were real, and her children were inside the house, depending on her to make the right choice. In what would prove to be a fateful decision, Brenda opened her wooden front door but kept the metal screen door securely closed between them. This barrier represented her final boundary. She was willing to talk, but she wasn't willing to let him inside where her children were sleeping. That screen door was the last line of defense between her family and a man whose history of violence had already taught her to be afraid. But for Bentley, that closed screen door represented defiance, rejection, and the final obstacle between him and what he believed he deserved. In his desperate state, with law enforcement closing in and his options disappearing, Brenda's refusal to help him triggered the violent rage that had been building throughout their relationship. What happened next lasted only seconds, but would destroy multiple lives forever. Bentley pulled out a gun and fired multiple shots directly through the screen door, striking Brenda as she stood in her own doorway. The woman who had tried so hard to protect her family from this exact scenario became the victim of the violence she had been trying to escape. The gunshots shattered the quiet night on Joyce Drive, but more importantly, they shattered the lives of 3 children who witnessed their mother's murder. These innocent kids, who had already lived through the tension and fear of their mother's relationship with Bentley, now watched in horror as he took her life right in front of them. In the chaos that followed, as Bentley fled the scene, those brave children did what their mother would have been proud of. They called 911 and told the truth about what they had seen. Their testimony would become the foundation of the case against the man who had just destroyed their world. Have you ever witnessed something like this in your city? Share your thoughts below about how communities can better protect families from domestic violence. When Baton Rouge police officers arrived at the Joyce Drive crime scene in the early morning hours of September 17th, they were met with a heartbreaking sight that would stay with them for years. Brenda Mullins lay dead in her own doorway, multiple gunshot wounds telling the story of an execution-style killing that had been carried out through her screen door. The wooden door stood open, but the metal barrier that had represented her final attempt at protection was now riddled with bullet holes. But while the physical evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened, it was the testimony of 3 traumatized children that would prove to be the most crucial element in the investigation. Despite having just witnessed their mother's murder, these brave kids were able to provide police with the one piece of information that would make all the difference: the identity of the shooter. Without hesitation, all 3 children positively identified Davon "Juice" Bentley as the man who had killed their mother. They knew him from his relationship with Brenda, they recognized his voice, and they had seen him clearly during the confrontation at their front door. Their identification was immediate, certain, and would become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. The problem was that Bentley was already gone. By the time police arrived at the scene, he had fled into the night, beginning what would become a multi-state manhunt for a killer who was already experienced at evading law enforcement. This wasn't Bentley's first time running from the police. His criminal history had taught him how to disappear, how to stay off the radar, and how to put distance between himself and the consequences of his actions. Within hours of the murder, Baton Rouge police had issued warrants for Bentley's arrest and alerted law enforcement agencies across the region. But tracking down a fugitive who had already proven himself capable of violent crime required coordination between multiple jurisdictions and careful police work to avoid putting more innocent people at risk. The manhunt stretched from Louisiana across state lines as investigators followed leads and tracked Bentley's movements. He had connections in multiple states, access to transportation, and the desperation of someone who knew that capture meant spending the rest of his life behind bars. Every day he remained free was another day that communities across the South had a dangerous killer in their midst. The break in the case came when authorities tracked Bentley to Denver, Colorado, hundreds of miles from the scene of his crime. How he had made it that far, who had helped him, and what he had been planning to do next would become part of the larger investigation. But what mattered most was that law enforcement had finally located their target. The arrest in Denver brought an end to the manhunt, but marked the beginning of the legal process that would determine Bentley's fate. As he was taken into custody, investigators were already compiling the evidence that would be used to prosecute him for second-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and multiple firearm offenses. The case against Bentley was strong from the beginning. Eyewitness testimony from the children, physical evidence from the crime scene, and his own history of domestic violence and criminal behavior that established both motive and pattern. When Davon "Juice" Bentley was extradited back to Louisiana to face justice for Brenda Mullins' murder, prosecutors wasted no time in filing the most serious charges possible. The formal indictment included second-degree murder for Brenda's death, attempted first-degree murder charges, and multiple firearm offenses that reflected the severity of his crimes and his status as a repeat offender. The legal proceedings that followed would test the strength of the case that investigators had built against Bentley. But with eyewitness testimony from 3 children who had watched their mother die, physical evidence from the crime scene, and Bentley's own documented history of violence and domestic abuse, prosecutors felt confident they could secure a conviction. During the trial, the courtroom heard testimony that painted a devastating picture of the events on Joyce Drive. The children, now forced to relive the worst night of their lives, bravely took the stand to identify the man who had destroyed their family. Their testimony was clear, consistent, and heartbreaking. They had seen Bentley shoot their mother through the screen door, and they would never forget what he had taken from them. The physical evidence corroborated every detail of their account. Ballistics experts testified about the trajectory of the bullets. Crime scene investigators described the evidence they had collected, and medical examiners explained the fatal injuries that Brenda had suffered. Each piece of evidence built upon the last, creating an overwhelming case against a man whose own actions had sealed his fate. Bentley's defense team faced an almost impossible task. How do you defend someone when 3 children witnessed the crime, when the physical evidence supports their testimony, and when the defendant's own criminal history establishes a clear pattern of escalating violence? The evidence was simply too strong, the witnesses too credible, and the crime too clear-cut for any reasonable doubt to exist. When the jury returned their verdict, it came as no surprise to anyone who had followed the case. Guilty on all counts: second-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and the firearm charges that reflected his illegal possession and use of the weapon that killed Brenda Mullins. The sentencing phase brought the finality that Brenda's family had been waiting for. The judge imposed the harshest penalty available under Louisiana law: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Bentley would spend the rest of his life behind bars, never again able to hurt another woman, never again able to terrorize another family. Even in the face of this ultimate consequence, Bentley showed no remorse for his actions. His continued defiance in the courtroom demonstrated the same lack of empathy and accountability that had characterized his entire criminal career, confirming that the justice system had made the right decision in ensuring he would never walk free again. The tragic death of Brenda Mullins represents far more than just another true crime story. It's a stark reminder of how criminal behavior follows a predictable pattern of escalation that too often ends in irreversible tragedy. Bentley's journey from his 2017 arrest to committing murder in 2020 shows us exactly how violence builds upon itself when left unchecked by the justice system and ignored by society. What we see in Bentley's case is the classic cycle of violence that experts have documented for decades. It starts with smaller crimes, property damage, illegal weapons possession, then escalates to more serious offenses like home invasion. Each arrest should have been a warning sign, each charge an opportunity for intervention. Instead, Bentley was allowed to continue his pattern of increasingly dangerous behavior until it culminated in the ultimate crime: taking an innocent woman's life. For viewers watching this story, it's crucial to understand the warning signs that Brenda Mullins likely experienced during their brief relationship. Domestic violence rarely starts with physical abuse. It begins with control, manipulation, and emotional intimidation. The red flags include excessive jealousy, attempts to isolate victims from friends and family, explosive anger over minor issues, and threats of violence when things don't go their way. Brenda recognized these signs and made the brave decision to end the relationship, but tragically, leaving an abusive partner is often the most dangerous time for victims. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is how Bentley's social media presence completely contradicted his real-life behavior. His Instagram account, with tens of thousands of followers, glorified violence and street life in a way that made criminal behavior seem exciting and desirable. This dangerous glamorization of violence through social media creates a feedback loop where real crimes become content, and content inspires more real crimes. Young people following accounts like Bentley's need to understand that the violence being celebrated online has real victims, real consequences, and real families left destroyed in its wake. The most heartbreaking element of this tragedy is the impact on Brenda's 3 children, who not only lost their mother, but were forced to witness her murder. The trauma of witnessing domestic violence affects children for the rest of their lives, influencing their ability to form healthy relationships, their mental health, and their overall development. These children will carry the memory of that night forever, and society has a responsibility to ensure they receive the support and counseling they need to heal from this unimaginable experience. This case also highlights our collective responsibility as community members to intervene when we see signs of domestic violence. Too often, people assume that what happens behind closed doors is none of their business, but domestic violence thrives in silence and isolation. When we see warning signs, when we hear arguments escalating, when we notice someone becoming increasingly controlling or threatening, we have a moral obligation to speak up, to offer support, and to connect victims with resources that can help them escape dangerous situations. For anyone currently experiencing domestic violence, please know that help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233 provides 24/7 confidential support, safety planning, and connections to local resources. Local law enforcement agencies also have specialized domestic violence units trained to handle these sensitive situations with the care and urgency they deserve. What do you think really happened here? Could this tragedy have been prevented if the justice system had taken Bentley's previous crimes more seriously? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that examine not just what happened, but why it happened and how we can prevent it from happening again. As we close this heartbreaking chapter, it's impossible not to think about how different things could have been. Brenda Mullins' death was entirely preventable. If the justice system had taken Bentley's escalating criminal behavior more seriously, if his pattern of domestic abuse had been properly addressed, if someone had intervened before his violence reached its deadly conclusion. But while we've spent this time examining the actions of a killer, we must never forget that the real story here belongs to Brenda Mullins, a mother who died protecting her children, a woman who recognized danger and tried to escape it, a victim whose life had value far beyond the circumstances of her death. She deserves to be remembered not as a statistic in domestic violence data, but as a person who mattered, who was loved, and whose loss has left an irreparable hole in the lives of those who knew her. Her 3 children, now growing up without their mother, represent both the devastating cost of domestic violence and the hope that future generations can learn from this tragedy. Their courage in identifying their mother's killer helped ensure that justice was served, but no verdict can bring back what they lost that night. This case serves as an urgent reminder that domestic violence is not a private matter. It's a community crisis that requires all of us to stay vigilant, speak up, and support those who need help escaping dangerous relationships. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell for more true crime content that examines the cases that shape our understanding of justice and human nature. Remember, stay safe,